Okay, I'm back to visit with Ed a little bit, and Ed, it looks like you're working on some Flathead Fords here.
Yeah, I do. Right? Got a couple here this morning. I always got one or two in the fire someplace doing something.
Okay.
If I can find a good one that's not cracked,
okay,
it's kind of hard to do that.
Okay, so that is a good question. I guess, I mean, they're so old now. So how hard is it to find a good block to work from?
It is really hard to find one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's why the prices keeps going higher and higher and higher.
And
even though if we have, I have several here that I don't want to even tear them apart because they're old and I don't want to spend 2 or 3 hours tearing it apart, or more even. Sometimes they're hard to get apart and find out they got 2 or 3 cracks in them.
Oh,
so
yeah.
you just waste your time. Even the parts you take out of them are not worth anything because if all the motors are cracked, you have nothing to put the parts back in again.
Right.
So now you got a whole bunch of good parts, but no block.
Right. Yeah, if you don't have a good block, you're just wasting your time.
You're wasting your time.
Yeah, okay.
If you get a good block, now you can take some of these apart and knowing that you do have a good block, but the block's the heart of the whole thing.
Okay.
That's what keeps everything going.
Right.
And
how hard?
We had a bad thing in freezing because people, a lot of times the water pumps are so low in the engine and there's a drain on them. They originally had a drain on them and people didn't know there was a drain, so they never drained the water out of the bottom of the motor. In the wintertime they froze. It wasn't because of heating cracks, you know, and even then once they cracked from the being frozen, then right away then that caused more circulation problems because of cracks and went from there, and then it would overheat and cause more cracks.
Right.
So originally beginning they were frozen.
If an engine block has a crack, is it automatically not repairable, or is there some way?
We repaired a lot of them, depends on where the crack's at.
Okay.
And I used to send them down to another facility. It was a diesel company, and they put them in a big furnace and heated the block up extremely hot, and then they would weld cast, or would put cast back in it, like solder or braze.
But it's actual cast iron?
Cast iron, yeah. Floated right in there like the cast motor.
Wow.
With a torch. There were some guys that were really good at it. And then so we ground it back out again and they looked like brand new. And it fixed the cracks. It was most expensive though. This is nothing to spend $200 or $300 fixing a couple cracks in the motor.
Okay, so can you give me examples of where it's okay to maybe have a crack and where it's not a good idea, where it's harder to fix?
It's kind of difficult because usually up in the upper section, up in the valves part of it, you don't want any cracks in here. Okay. In the seats, because this would be difficult to fix a crack down in one of the seats down in the inner part of the motor.
I see.
You'd have to grind it all out, take a lot of grinder and grind a big groove in it.
Okay.
So you can fill it back up and make it the original size.
Okay.
You wouldn't want to add to that part of that motor. You have to mill it back down to the original shape.
Where there's smaller voids, is that where they're more susceptible or delicate usually for cracking?
No, more of the bigger voids.
Is that right?
Like between here and the casting, once you remove this area in here, this is pretty thin in here.
Right, okay.
Down the casting, it's a sand casting. So there was, that's what they were casting. So it'd be fairly thin. I would think something along in the line of, if it was, the thick part would be 1/4 inch thick.
Okay.
It's not a 1/2 inch thick. And some would be thinner yet. I've seen some of the part of these blocks, I've drilled holes in them for some reason, just for experimental, and it'd be like less than 1/4 inch thick.
Okay.
So no wonder it cracked.
Yeah.
It wouldn't take much to crack.
Sure.
That thickness, yeah.
Right.
So, and this is one of them that I just purchased the other day. I purchased it because it's not cracked.
Okay. So that's a good block there.
And this is it's a standard bore. It's never been bored out. Sometimes you can bore these out. Of course, you bore them out 30, 40, 60, and 100. Sometimes you bore them 120.
So,
Flathead.
So really, you can sometimes rebuild these many times.
Many times, yeah. Many times, yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay. So what kind of age range would this block be?
This block here happens to be because there's no bell housing on the back. There's no bell housing, so this is a 49 to 53.
Okay, so that's the last really
That's
series.
the last year they made them, yeah.
Okay.
They left the bell housing off because you can adapt different things to them. And then it has a bigger flywheel and a bigger clutch. And the other ones didn't have a bigger clutch or a bigger flywheel because it wouldn't go in there.
Right.
So and they didn't need it. Most of the flatheads usually could use a 9-inch clutch.
Okay.
That's good enough for a street car. It lasted for years and years and years until you started to put them in a pickup truck or something heavy duty, industrial motors. A lot of these were industrial motors.
Okay, right.
They ran water mills and water pumps and sawmills and all kinds of industrial stuff.
Uh-huh.
So then you'd have to have maybe a 10-inch clutch and even a bigger truck, because these were in dump trucks.
Sure.
Up in age, and they would have 11-inch clutch.
So would they have a different bell housing on the back on the truck motors? Or?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
And a bigger, sometimes 4 speeds and 5 speeds, small dump truck.
Right.
Yeah, so they was quite usable, yeah.
Okay.
So this one here on the ground here has to be an early one. This is probably one of the earliest ones. I think this is a 33.
Okay.
And
Yeah, you
that's
should see the bell
33 or
housing there.
34, you see the bell housing on the back.
Right. So this would be a very early, 33,
This is
34.
Yeah, this would be a very early one. It would be a 221 cubic inch.
Okay.
This one happens to be a 235
Okay.
or 239. If it had a Mercury crank, it'd be a 255 cubic inch.
Really? And was the difference there between just the crank?
Just the crank, it's quarter-inch longer crank.
Okay.
So, and make it a Mercury crank. But that motor there is really unusual. Being a 33 motor, it's almost impossible to rebuild it. I haven't spent much time on it to find out how much is wrong with it or anything like this.
Yeah.
Let me stand it up a little bit and I'll show you some of the things about it. This is the early years they didn't have rod bearings and main bearings.
Really?
Inserts like we have today. So these motors had bearings in them.
Okay, right.
And you buy these, and all motors have them. You can change these to different sizes, and that would be different thicknesses.
Uh-huh.
So if you was to turn your machine the crankshaft down 10 thousandths, well then these bearings would all be, the set would be 10 thousandths thicker.
Yeah, so you make up the difference with a different bearing, right?
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
So if you turn it down 40 thousandths, the bearing would be 40 thousandths, and put it back in the motor. You can all repair the motor. That's all a normal thing to do that.
Sure.
This particular motor, in the early days, they didn't have these bearings.
Right.
So they took lead and a compound, lead Babbitt type thing. Some other materials, I think there was some tin in there to make the lead stronger. And they actually heated the block up and melded it in the block, so you couldn't take it out. So it was stuck right in there.
So it's like a one-time use.
Yes, one-time use.
Okay.
So then, once it was standard, you couldn't do anything with it. And then the factory machined it out perfectly for a standard crank, like a 1.5 inch stroke crank, or 1.5 inch bearing. So this happens to be one that's got that.
Well, so did this engine, was this originally built at the factory with Babbitt bearings?
Yes.
Okay.
See, they're poured in here. I can't get that out.
Oh, so
And this is the same.
So
type
instead of
plate.
an insert bearing, it's poured into place.
Yeah, melded into the cast
melted
iron.
in. Okay.
So if you turn the crankshaft down, you can't build this up.
Right, unless you can get that out. And then if
Yes.
you can't get it out, what are you going to do?
Well, then we take the crankshaft down,
Okay.
and we can do that down the street, weld the crank back up again.
So you build it back up.
Back up to standard.
Okay.
We put it on a machine and weld it, wire welder, weld them all up, and grind it back down to standard.
I see.
Yeah.
So this 10 under, 30 under business, you can't do that with this.
A little bit. We can
Okay.
cut this down.
Okay.
Maybe cut it down to make it smooth,
Uh-huh.
and then build the crank up to match it.
I see.
Most expensive.
Okay.
You're talking $800 or $900 to do that.
Now, why would someone spend the extra money to do that on an
Oh,
old?
you wouldn't. See, that's what the motors are not worth building.
I see.
And this happens to be some special rod bearings on this motor.
Okay.
It's a flanged bearing. They have bearings in it. And the last time I tried to buy them for a bearing like this, it was $600 just for the rod bearings. And I couldn't find them. They were back in New Jersey someplace. but I didn't buy them because we just passed that motor and went on to a cheaper motor.
Went on to something else.
Yeah, something that was more rebuildable.
So I guess only if someone was really insistent on an authentic original
33
series
or
block.
34 motor, even up into 35, 36s was that way too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so the insert bearings really came in around 37, 38
Yeah,
somewhere?
something like that, yeah. And all of them were 46, 47 was all good engines to rebuild.
I
30,
see.
Yeah.
Okay, so I learned something once again.
Yeah.
I love that.
So it's a little bit difficult to rebuild one of these. It's almost impossible
Okay.
today's. Yeah.
Now, is there any special methods you use for checking for cracks? We were talking about cracks
Magnaflux
earlier.
them.
Magnaflux?
With the Magna, yeah. And
Okay.
we can walk around the corner and look at that if you
Yeah,
want
I'd love to see how that works.
Yeah. This happens to have an aluminum manifold in here. He's
Okay.
working on this.
Okay.
Here's one of the things he just did. This is a big block Ford manifold. And this was water eated out, so he's welded this.
Okay, so you're
And
building
we'll
it back up
Build
on
it
one
up with
side.
this aluminum, so he's welded it up. We can do this. We do a lot of this.
Interesting.
And then we'll machine this down and clean it up just like it was perfect.
Oh,
Yeah.
huh.
But other than that, this machine here is where we Magnaflux our heads.
Okay.
And this is a magnet.
Okay. Yeah, that looks like a serious
And
magnet.
we put it on here. And we spray some powder on it. This yellow powder.
Okay.
We spray this on here. And that would, this is magnetic metal. So that would show up a north and south pole.
Okay.
And a crack will show north and south pole. So it all lines up and show you exactly where the crack is.
Okay, and if there's no crack, you don't see that
You don't see anything.
pattern.
It'll just be a flat
Yeah.
mist.
It'll all be even, I
mist
guess.
of even powder. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so that's what we do. Yeah.
Interesting. And so simple
And most
as
of the
that.
time, there's some of the powder.
Yeah, it's a very fine.
Yeah, real
Let's
fine
see.
powder.
Huh.
And by this time it gets into this part of the shop. This is the head shop here.
Yeah,
But,
I noticed there are a few heads sitting around
yeah,
here.
But most of this is already Magnaflux twice already.
Okay. By the time
So
it
we
gets
make
to this,
sure
okay.
one more time, make sure it's not cracked.
So this is kind of like the final test station here.
Final test station right here with the lights and
Okay,
stuff. Yeah.
I see.
On finding the crack.
Uh-huh.
Make sure before we machine any more of it.
Right.
Yeah, you won't want to machine something and find out it's cracked 2 or 3 places.
Yeah, that's right. It's definitely worth the time.
And we do not fix cylinder heads that are cracked.
Okay.
A lot of people do. We have some machinery that's capable of doing that, but we don't do it ourselves.
Okay.
If we figure if it's cracked once, right now, as far as the supply of used parts, we have a huge supply of used parts. And before we would take a chance on selling a customer something that was being repaired,
Rather
we
take
would
a
just
good part you
automatically
have.
just scrap it.
Yeah.
And we scrap a lot of parts.